they asked me to talk about something that I really care about, which is glucose monitoring, but they also wanted me to really angle it around mental health. So the examples I'm going to use today in the second half of this talk are going to be geared towards that topic. But I have to say, it's a pretty hard act to follow with that talk previously. I mean, the microbiome is so hot right now. Everyone is so inspired by this area of study. But I'm particularly interested in mitochondrial health because to me, energy is everything to health. This is what I study. I study essentially what is health. Because when I was in medical school, most of what I discovered was we were studying sickness. But I'm particularly interested in figuring out how do we create healthier bodies? How do we not just fix sickness, but how do we reverse the chances of us getting sick in the first place? So to it really begin, you have to think about these definitions. The old definition of health is that it's a static state. It's complete physical, mental, and social well-being. That's a pie-in-the-sky idea. The new idea of health is that it's the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of adversity. And fundamentally, mitochondria are the site of our ability to adapt to the environment around us, and to the food supply we have, and to the stress that we're put under. Homeostasis is basically these set points that we have in our bodies that indicate general health. So when your vital signs check, they're looking for homeostatic markers. But I'm interested in allostasis, which is our ability to maintain stability through change. And again, the side of that is largely mitochondrial health when it comes to blood sugar metabolism. But mental health, according to the World Health Organization, is not just the absence of disorder, but the ability to reach your full potential. And the word potential really comes into play here because a lot of mitochondrial health actually relates to physics, and we're going to get into that next. But to be able to cope with normal stressors and to work productively. So this is what we're going to chat about today. Okay, so another thing I need to tell you about for some more definitions is what is salutogenesis? This is essentially the opposite of pathogenesis. It's the way we become healthier. And if you're an healthy organism, when you get hit with stress, you bounce back. If you're an unhealthy organism, when you get hit with stress, you break down. So the goal is to build health so that when stress hits you, you don't fall apart. So when stress hits you, you don't end up with high blood sugar or with disease. Physiologic resiliency is the ability of an organism to cope with the challenge and return to normal baseline function following the perturbation. So when we're young, we're like these weevil wobbles. We fall over and we come back up really easily. That's because we have 4 to 10% of the functional capacity that we need. But when we're old, unfortunately, we hit 30, I'm 35 now, our functional capacity begins to decline. So you're less able to bounce back. And so we give people drugs to prop them up on the labs, but it's not true health. It's just the imagined perspective of health. So organ reserve and energy capacity. This is different when we're young. We have more mitochondria and we have healthier mitochondria. So if you look at a child, they're glowing. They have tons of bioenergetic capacity because they're literally building a body. When you see a woman who's pregnant and she's building a baby, she's beaming with light for a reason because her body's literally built bioenergetic capacity to create a body. The key to healthy aging is fundamentally building bioenergetic capacity, and the way you do that is you build more mitochondria. These are the power plants, guys. These are what we learned in grade school, right? They take our food, they turn it into, they harvest electrons from these substrates, and they generate electrochemical gradient and it makes this hydrogen turbine run. This is our ATPase. This is how we make energy. They give us membrane potential. So again, the word potential comes up, right? And we store the charge in our membranes, and these mitochondrial membranes are capacitors. So essentially, they're not exactly batteries, but they're similar. They make and they store charge. And they're also mediators of the stress response, okay? So they're not just a powerhouse, but they sense and they integrate signals. And this is really important because they're actually sensing and integrating stress around you. They are literally your body's constantly trying to keep you alive. It wants you to survive, and so your mitochondria are like, okay, can I survive? Great. If you can survive and you have low stress and you're safe, then your body's like, cool, I can reproduce. That's essentially what your biology is trying to keep you here for. In primitive times, acute stress is running away from danger, is eating phytonutrient-dense plants that you find in your environment. It's fasting mostly and eating occasionally. It's cold and heat stress from living outside, and it's adaptive stress response that our body basically creates to keep us alive. This is actually great, right? The acute stress is actually good for us, and hormesis makes us stronger, but chronic stress, all of these systems in our genetics that are designed for primitive life have gone awry, and this is modern life now. So modern life, we rarely fast, we're never in ketosis, we don't eat enough nutrients, we eat processed foods, We sit all the time. We ride in cars. We live in noise-polluted environments that send signals to our bodies that we're not safe. And we have constant phone, email distractions and disrupted circadian rhythms, and we're all sick, okay? It's not that complicated, it turns out. So acute stress, your body's trying to protect yourself. You have this amazing protective response that generates the immune pro-inflammatory cytokines that would protect you from infection. You actually get insulin resistance as a protective mechanism to keep you alive so that you have enough glucose to get away from danger, okay? But the problem is in chronic stress, all this goes to shit, sorry, but it does. So under chronic stress, you have this chronic HPA axis activation. You have chronically elevated blood sugar because of chronic insulin resistance. And instead of running away from danger, we sit at our desks and we stress out about our coworkers. And so what do? We store fat around our abdomens. It gets in our organs, it gets in our liver, and we get liver insulin resistance, we get elevated fasting glucose, and we get sick with diabetes. So mitochondrial, this is the site of stress transduction. And if you look at the top things in the green boxes, ACEs, early childhood, or adverse childhood experiences, discrimination. There's actually research that shows discrimination increases blood sugar in racial minorities. Emotional stress from just having a fight with your partner. When's the last time you cried? Think about about emotional experience. How drained were you after that? Your batteries were just completely drained because stress is extremely energy taxing. Caregiving stress, massive stress. My mom is a caregiver right now for her mom, and I literally put a glucose monitor on her, and I saw what would happen when she went to see her mother, and it was a big glucose spike. So basically what happens is our bodies integrate this, and if we have too much stress, we get this thing called mitochondrial allostatic load. And this is all the side effects of chronic stress on the body, the reactive oxygen species, the mDNA damage, energy production deficiency, and eventually disease and accelerated aging. So under chronic stress, we lose our adaptive capacity. Our batteries get drained, and we get hit with a big, giant stress, and we get really sick. But if you actually build your bioenergetic capacity through things like hormesis, you actually build a bigger energy envelope. And so when you get hit with stress, you can handle it because you have enough energy output to react and to respond. But unfortunately, chronic stress decreases this envelope. And so what I see in chronic fatigue patients is they almost always have a setting of massive chronic stress, and then a big life stressor breaks the body. And usually, if you think about Marin right now, when we have these power outages, there's a lot of break-ins. Your body gets more susceptible to infection when you have low energy capacity to fight it off, because your immune system doesn't have, it's like an army, it doesn't have enough energy to fight. So mitohormesis, I don't have enough time to go over everything, but the real concept here is that if you do these mitohormetic stressors and you go back and forth, you oscillate between acute stressors and recovery, you end up with more bioenergetic capacity, and you build more mitochondria in your body. So this is like basically a seesaw. In a healthy body, you're seesawing. You're going back and forth between acute stress and recovery. Chronic stress, you're constantly in this state of mitochondrial fission. And you basically end up in, basically stress uses up the stored charge, you end up with weak coherent signals, and then you get sick. So this is a really cool slide. You should just take a photo because I can't explain everything, and I've got 40 slides and I've got 30 minutes. So if anyone wants this talk, please email me, and you just take my name at the end of take my contact information at the end of the talk. But fundamentally, the thing that I'm focused on is building health span and giving people health span. And the way that you get there is this intermittent induced hormesis. So I tell people about high-intensity interval training. I'll do about exercise, about xenohormetic stressors through food, all these things that unfortunately we don't have time to talk about today. But the problem is that basically this slide really explains that the pathological condition is when this chronic stress raises, and the direct damage to biomolecules occurs, and we end up with disease. So the old model is that there's something wrong with the genetics, and that's how we get sick, right? But we all know that's not true anymore. The new model is, and this is, again, a theory. I subscribe to this theory. I'm what people call a mitochondriac, which means I believe in the mitochondrial theory of aging, which is that when we lose our bioenergetic capacity, our pathology emerges. So the theory is that when you decline past 50% power, that's when you start getting chronic diseases. And your genetics will largely tell you which ones you're going to get, because you're more likely to have problems in those areas. So I have a family history of cancer. if I don't take care of myself, I'm likely to get it, long story short. But interestingly, you tend to see the most energy-demanding organs failing first. And so we see people with mental health problems constantly in America. And to me, mental health problems are not just a symptom of this idea of a neurotransmitter imbalance, which is like frankly out of date medicine, but a lot of it actually has to do with brains that just fundamentally are built out of poor materials. They don't have enough healthy fats. They've got rancid omega-6 oils, and so they're not conducting electricity effectively, but they're also brains that don't have enough energy flow. And chronic stress, we know, leads to burnout. Think about the word burnout alone. Think about the word worn out, drained, depleted, exhausted. It's like your batteries are dead, right? If you look at a person who's depressed, they are not emitting light. They are not a vibrant person who's just beaming light. They are often gray looking, often sallow looking. And part of the problem is that that depression is a downward spiral. When you're depressed, you don't exercise. When you're depressed, you don't eat well. When you're depressed, you don't connect with people. Think about the word connection alone. You don't go outside and touch the ground. You're not in nature. You're not doing healthy behaviors. And so it's not surprising that so many people are depressed and sick and anxious, because we're living lifestyles that do not contribute to bioenergetic capacity. Chronic stress breaks the brain. End of story, guys. Like, we know this. This is a fact. If you talk to anybody who's depressed, it's often they have a history of adverse childhood experiences. They have a history of chronic stress throughout their life. They have a history of just not being able to cope. And yes, part of it is genetic, but a lot of it actually is our lifestyle. So 3 main causes of chronic lifestyle-related diseases, according to this researcher, Martin Picard, who I really adore, and I think he's a genius, is chronic stress, inactivity, and eating the wrong foods, eating the wrong types of foods at the wrong times, basically over-consuming foods and the wrong kinds. These all contribute to activating the stress response, activating insulin resistance, leading to elevated blood glucose levels, and then everything else is downstream. You get damage to mitochondria, and then you get the hallmarks of aging. There's a really great paper on the 9 hallmarks of aging. And if you're a mitochondriac like me, you believe that a lot of these are downstream of mitochondrial dysfunction. And then the other outcomes, these disease states that we treat with drugs and surgery, these are merely symptoms of an organism that's lost its bioenergetic capacity. And so I think we really need to think about redesigning medicine. It's kind of we need a paradigm shift. Sorry, this is for my Stanford course, so I usually explain these. But yeah, I think we've been starting with these end outcomes, and we're not thinking enough upstream. So largely, what I care about is monitoring things like stress in real time, monitoring blood sugar in real time, and monitoring activity so that I can get a person to change their behavior so that they don't end up with these end organ problems. These are the first signs of an organism failing to adapt to its environment and lifestyle. So we're either building physiologic resiliency or we're breaking down. And essentially, type 2 diabetes from a systems perspective is basically when these adaptive processes are failing. And then the goal is that we don't have these fail, that we age well, and we're physiologically resilient over time. Okay, so monitoring blood sugar, this is part of the big talk, right? Right now, when you go to the doctor and you get a fasting blood sugar, you're getting a teeny snapshot of your body. You're getting one snapshot in time, and then they're basing all this information off of this one picture. It's like, if I took a picture of you, would that be who you are? Or if I saw a movie of your life? A movie of your life is gonna be a little bit more indicative of your health. And glucose monitor is gonna give you that. Hemoglobin A1C is another test that you get at the doctor. It is a terrible test. It is like only 75% effective at identifying diabetes and 64% effective for prediabetes. And so it just isn't a good test. And I don't know why we're using it, but mostly because it's convenient and cheap, but it's not a good test. And the glucose tolerance testing, no one does, because nobody's going to go sit in a doctor's office and drink a bunch of sugar unless you're a pregnant woman. So a lot of the tests we're using today are not identifying the problems because they're not giving the full picture. They're not showing you what happens to your blood sugar after meals. Like today, I had a smoothie and had a banana and blueberries, no other sugar. And I spiked my blood sugar, and I never eat bananas for this reason. And I ended up having to do, I actually did 400 squats today to lower it in 15 minutes. I went from 160 to 100. And that was literally, and I started measuring my blood sugar as I was doing the squats to see it go down. But you don't know that a smoothie could cause your blood sugar to spike unless you're wearing a glucose monitor. And you won't know what kind of foods affect you unless you wear them. Okay, so big problem is that insurance currently doesn't pay for this. So you have to ask your doctor for a prescription, and then you have to pay out of pocket, and it's about $35 for a sensor now at Walgreens. But it is really annoying that the healthcare system really waits till you're a fragile, brittle diabetic to actually do anything about this. So anyway, I'm still going to talk about how to read the glucose curve because some of you are going to go get glucose monitors, and someday, and I'd say in the next like 2 years, just like we saw genetic companies emerge and tons of companies, now there's like so many companies that are doing genetic interpretation, we're going to see a whole swath of companies coming out doing software for CGM. And it's going to be for all sorts of things. You're going to see companies for mental health, companies for metabolism, companies for performance, companies for diabetes, companies for prediabetes. Omada Health already got a partnership with Abbott, so you're going to see prediabetes being managed with the CGM. It's all coming. It's just, this is a preview. So there's actually 6 ways to read the curve, but I left out glucose tolerance testing because nobody does it. But that's because nobody does it. But we'll talk about what people do. So fasting glucose. So this individual is like basically pre-diabetic because their blood sugar is around 100 mostly. And they're a stress executive. Their overnight fasting glucose is around 100, so they're basically pre-diabetic. And you can change, if you change your lifestyle, you will see your fasting blood sugar go down. I actually had a client that was wearing a glucose monitor and discovered that when he would wake up in the morning, his blood sugar was really low, and he had this sense of impending doom every morning. And all we had to do was get his blood sugar balanced, and he woke up feeling better, and he actually had a lot of his depression alleviated. The problem, though, is that the best way to lower fasting glucose is fasting, but nobody fasts because it's really hard. And it's also actually kind of slightly contraindicated if you're under significant stress to do a lot of fasting. But if you aren't under significant stress and you want to avoid having a high fasting glucose, the best way to drain the sink of your liver fat is fasting. This is like basically a typical American eating pattern, never emptying the sink. And then this is more like a 24 to 36 hour fast, which is draining the glycogen sink. It's a sugar you store in your body to eat when you're not eating. And then there's like intermittent fasting, time restricted eating. But so like I'm a big fan of fasting. I think it's really important to health. I think we should all be fasting more. Basically it activates autophagy, burns liver fat, but you gotta be careful with stress because it can make you more stressed out. If I'm really stressed out and I fast, my blood sugar goes up during fasting because it's adding stress to my stress cup. So the best time to fast is when you're chilled out and you're relaxed and you're calm and your life's in a good state. A lot of people are insulin resistant and can't fast effectively because when they do, their blood sugar drops and their ketones don't rise because their stress hormones are keeping their blood sugar not at the optimal range for ketosis to happen. So I actually give people CBD when they're really stressed out and their fasting glucose is high. And I actually had a client whose blood sugar went from 100 to 80 just by adding CBD because it lowered, and it's some adaptogens, by lowering her stress levels. So just lowering your stress can actually lower your output. And she was also depressed. And her depression alleviated from just really focusing on her stress and focusing on, just a few supplements, which was really cool. There's some evidence that explains this, but I only have 11 minutes. Let's see if we can get through it all. Okay, peak post-meal blood sugar. This is the big one, guys. So after meals, a lot of people are spiking blood sugar and don't even know it. And the problem is that every time your blood sugar spikes, you end up with oxidative stress, and that damages the blood vessels in your body. That damages your brain blood vessels. That damages your kidney blood vessels. It damages your vision and your retina. And it also leads to mood disorders. So I see people all the time with anxiety disorders who are eating sugar like it's their job. And I'm like, look, if you're going to be eating sugar to deal with your anxiety, you're going to constantly have anxiety because you're going to be riding the roller coaster. So you have to balance your blood sugar if you want better mental health. There's no question. There's doctors in New York that I'm friends with that are functional psychiatrists that literally the first thing they do with people is they get their blood sugar balanced because that's how you get your brain to have a steady fuel supply, and that sends a signal to your body you're safe and that there's fuel available. Not that there's like intermittently a lot of fuel and not a lot of fuel. Those low blood sugar dips, if anyone says to you, oh, I have hypoglycemia, you have insulin resistance and you need to change your diet. Hypoglycemia is almost never it's rarely an actual clinical condition. It's usually related to hyperglycemia. So people who stress eat, right? They do it because it sends a signal to their body that they're safe. And unfortunately, stress eating causes more liver fat to develop and more fasting blood sugar to rise and more disease and more insulin resistance. So you got to get a handle on stress eating if you want to get healthy. But the Western diet is basically constantly putting you in this roller coaster. And this is part of the reason why our brains are so broken. This is part of the reason why we have so much mental health problems, is we're eating crap. We're not giving our body the healthy food it needs. I talked about the patients with sugar who are sugar addicts, but there's also I have patients with ADHD who literally cannot focus because their blood sugar is so out of whack. You get their blood sugar even, and magically they don't need stimulants. There's also I have patients with chronic fatigue and lots of brain fog. I had a client with chronic fatigue, and one of the things that we did with her was we discovered that grains were just not working for her. So we removed grains from her diet, and her brain fog lifted and her anxiety lifted. And she's just like amazed at how much more energy she has just from not having anxiety in this background of her brain all day long. Whole foods, sugar-free, that's the way to go. Overeating alone, just eating too much fuel, even if it's healthy foods, guys, just overeating. I mean, this is coming up, guys. We're all going to have Thanksgiving. What I'm going to do basically during Thanksgiving is I'm fasting until dinner because, and I'm probably going to fast for a day before. But the thing about it is like you got to be really careful with overeating. Overeating damages mitochondria. It's not good. And the antidote for a big blood sugar spike, if you do see it on your blood sugar monitor, is exercise. So last summer, one thing you shouldn't do if you're fasting is eat sweet potato pancakes on a retreat because your blood sugar will spike to 187, and then you'll freak out and go outside and do 30 minutes of yoga, and then it'll drop to 108, which is pretty cool. So the fun thing about glucose monitors is that you can actually literally intervene in the moment when you see something go wrong. Now, my blood sugar normally is around 100 to 110 after meals right now, but if I do eat like refined carbohydrates and bananas, I spike. And I just know my body now. My body just doesn't like that kind of food. So this is the coolest thing I've discovered, and Stanford is actually doing a study right now on glycemic variability, or on stress and blood sugar, Michael Snyder's lab, and basically what they're going to do is they're just going to prove that stress affects blood sugar. And I don't think you need to necessarily do a study to prove this, but I guess the world needs more research. So I put these on people, and basically I can literally read a person's lifestyle, and I can look at your blood sugar monitor, I can say, hey, what happened on this day? Why were you so stressed out? And he's like, how did you know? I'm like, because look at your blood sugar. It's really glycemically variable. So this is what you can really read a person's lifestyle by looking at a glucose monitor. So one of my clients, I was like, what happened on this day? He's like, well, I had like a hemorrhoid removed. And I was like, well, that explains it. He's like, yeah, and then I ate pancakes to make myself feel better. And I was like, okay, that might explain your glycemic variability that day. So let's not take it I'm not too worried about you. Also, an interesting story. I had a patient who, she had prediabetes, and her doctors were like, sorry, you got prediabetes. We can't really help you. Just take metformin. And she's like, I want to know why. So we put a glucose monitor on her, and we discovered that her emotionally abusive partner was actually causing her blood sugar to rise every time she was in his presence, and he was being abusive to her. And then she would go spend time with her family in Portland, and her blood sugar would just balance. And so literally stress alone can be the main cause of blood sugar abnormalities in people. Glycemic variability, very bad, because it leads to free radical production and can lead to advanced glycation end products, and it just ages you. And so if you want to age and get diabetes, be really stressed out and eat crap. Meal timing. So eating late into the night, this used to be my problem. I used to actually eat way too late, and I would have big blood sugar spikes in the night. If you eat late, you're less insulin sensitive, so you got to be really careful and actually try to close your window. Eat earlier in the day. Your body is most insulin sensitive in the morning, so the best time for carbs is actually earlier, but a lot of people tell you to eat carbs late in the evening because they're like, it'll help you sleep. I think using food to sleep is not necessarily the right strategy. I think the best strategy is just build a healthier body so you just sleep naturally really well. But finding your right meal timing is going to be personal. It's going to be different for everyone. Some people fast really effectively in the evening. Some people fast really effectively in the morning. Some people, like their biggest meal of the day in the afternoon. Some people like in the evening. The point is that just try not to eat in the middle of the night and try not to eat late at night. That's really the key. Circadian Desynchrony impairs blood sugar homeostasis. So if you want to avoid jet lag, fast on flights, and then get on the new meal schedule right when you go to a new city. So I'm going to be going to Tel Aviv on Monday, and I'm going to start fasting, and then basically I'm not going to eat until I get into the new meal schedule when I'm there. And I found that this is like literally the best way to beat jet lag. Is just you basically trick your body into the new time zone because you re-entrain your organs to the new light cycles. But yeah, eating late at night, shift work, we all know it's really bad for health. So if you really want to help manage your stress better, try to keep your eating window during the day and try not to eat late at night, and you're going to sleep better. Eating late at night actually can impair sleep. Meal frequency. So this is a bodybuilder who is eating the traditional bodybuilding diet, which is like 6 meals a day, and he's pre-diabetic. And basically, this is not a healthy eating pattern. I am not a subscriber to the idea that we need to eat 6 times a day. I think that breakfast was made up by Kellogg's. I think that snacking was invented by the food industry, and that most humans would actually benefit from just not snacking and not eating breakfast. That's my personal philosophy. That being said, it's very personal. Food is very personal, so you have to find what works for you. But eating all the time is part of the reason why we're so sick. And part of the problem is that we're eating snack foods. Now, there's evidence that shows that snacking on healthy foods doesn't have nearly the same effect as snacking on packaged processed crap that's made of refined carbs and refined vegetable oils. So just cut those out. Unfortunately, there's like a whole bag of Cheetos and Sun Chips and all that crap outside. Don't eat that. Just don't eat that. Don't eat conference food, people. Just don't. It's not good for you. And the soda, come on. If you're drinking soda in modern life right now, you're living in the 80s. I don't know who you are, but soda is insane. Thank you. All right, so the optimal health zone is basically just aligning ourselves with our primitive genetics and giving ourselves what our body's designed to do, which is to eat intermittently, to eat healthy foods, phytonutrient-rich foods, occasionally eat meat if you feel like it. If not, then it's fine. But we definitely don't need to be eating as much meat as we're eating. We definitely don't need as many animal products as we're consuming. I'm not a big believer that we necessarily need to all go plant-based, but I am a believer that we should try to eat just whole foods and just less of them and less often. So yeah, this is basically a summary of the things I talk about in my course at Stanford on how to enhance health span. It really relates to metabolism, to movement, to mastering stress, and to connection. And connection is around everything. So there you go, guys. Thank you. And please feel free to contact me.